As I stood in front of the mirror that evening, I adjusted my hair, tucking a loose strand behind my ear. The soft glow of the bathroom light illuminated my reflection, and I couldn't help but admire the navy blue dress I had chosen, simple yet elegant. Tonight was a family dinner at Robert's house, my father-in-law, and I wanted to look my best. David was still caught up in work as usual, which left me feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension about the evening ahead. "Are you ready, Sarah?" David's voice called from the living room, pulling me from my thoughts. "Just about," I replied, smoothing down the fabric of my dress one last time. I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different somehow. When we arrived at Robert's house, the warm, inviting atmosphere enveloped me like a comforting blanket. The smell of roasted chicken wafted through the air, and the sound of laughter echoed from the living room. Robert greeted us at the door with his usual charm, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Sarah, you look lovely tonight," he said, his gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you, Robert. You're looking good too," I responded, smiling politely. As I stepped inside, I noticed his eyes following me, a flicker of something unspoken in his expression. I brushed it off, attributing it to the familial warmth that often filled the room during these gatherings. Dinner was lively, filled with stories and laughter. I felt at ease, surrounded by family, as I shared a few anecdotes about my work. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that Robert's attention was focused on me more than on anyone else at the table. Each lingering glance made my heart race, a mix of flattery and unease bubbling within me. "David, how's your project going?" Robert asked, turning his attention to his son, who was engrossed in his meal. "Busy as always," David replied, his mind clearly elsewhere. "You know how it is." As the conversation flowed, I caught Robert looking at me again, a hint of something in his gaze that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. The moment our eyes met, I quickly looked down at my plate, feeling a heat rise to my cheeks. Was I imagining things? After dinner, we moved to the cozy living room for coffee. I settled into an armchair across from Robert, who poured a cup for me. "You really deserve that promotion, Sarah," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I've always admired your work ethic." "Thank you," I replied, trying to remain composed despite the intensity of his gaze. "I just put in the effort, you know?" "I think it's more than that," he said, his voice low and sincere. "You have a special talent. You light up the office." His compliment sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt a blush creep across my cheeks. "I appreciate that, Robert. It means a lot coming from you." As we continued to talk, the chemistry between us became undeniable. The way he spoke, the way his eyes sparkled when he looked at me, ignited a confusion within. I felt flattered, yet guilt gnawed at me. This was my father-in-law after all. "Tell me about your plans for the future," he asked, his tone conspiratorial. I hesitated, unsure if I should divulge my dreams. "I hope to climb the corporate ladder, maybe even take on a leadership role one day." "You're more than capable of that. I can see it," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "Just remember, you deserve to be happy and fulfilled." I nodded, unable to form a coherent response. There was something about his words that felt deeply personal, almost intimate. As the evening wore on, I found myself caught in a web of emotions, flattered by his attention, but tormented by the loyalty I felt toward David. Later that night, as I lay in bed, my mind raced with thoughts of the evening. I couldn't shake Robert's lingering glances or his compliments that felt like more than just familial kindness. Guilt washed over me as I remembered the vows I had made to David. I was drawn to Robert in a way I never expected, and the realization scared me. Was I reading too much into his behavior? Or was there something more brewing beneath the surface? I turned onto my side, staring at the dark ceiling, wrestling with my thoughts. I wanted to dismiss this attraction as a fleeting fancy, but it lingered like a shadow in my heart. What did it mean for my marriage? I sighed, feeling the weight of the night settle heavily on my chest. The family gathering was in full swing, laughter echoing throughout Robert's spacious living room. I could smell the rich aroma of roasted chicken wafting from the kitchen, mingling with the sweet scent of freshly baked pie. I stood by the snack table, mindlessly nibbling on a cheese cracker, when Robert approached me with a small, neatly wrapped package in his hands. "Sarah," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "I saw this and thought of you. I hope you like it." My heart skipped a beat as I looked up at him. "You didn't have to get me anything, Robert," I replied, though a part of me was secretly thrilled by his thoughtfulness. I tore the wrapping paper away, revealing a delicate silver bracelet adorned with tiny charms. Each charm seemed to tell a story, and I was entranced. "It's beautiful," I exclaimed, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. "Thank you so much." "Just a little something to celebrate your recent promotion," he said, his eyes sparkling with genuine warmth. "You deserve it, Sarah. You work so hard." David, who had been chatting with a few of his cousins nearby, overheard our exchange and approached us, a frown creasing his forehead. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone slightly defensive. "Just a gift from Robert," I said, forcing a smile and holding up the bracelet. "Isn't it lovely?" David shrugged, a dismissive gesture that stung. "You know how Robert is, always trying to play the nice guy," he said, rolling his eyes. I felt a pang of disappointment at his reaction. Did he really think that Robert's kindness was insincere? "Come on, David," I said, attempting to lighten the mood. "It's just a nice gesture." "Yeah, right," he replied, turning back to the group, leaving me feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. Why did David always have to undermine Robert's intentions? I glanced at Robert, who offered me a reassuring smile, though I could sense a flicker of tension behind his calm demeanor. As the evening wore on, I found myself slipping away from the crowd, seeking a moment of solitude on the porch. The night air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the warmth inside the house. I leaned against the railing, the bracelet glinting in the soft light of the moon. A moment later, Robert joined me, his presence enveloping me like a comforting blanket. "I hope David didn't upset you," he said softly, leaning against the railing beside me. "It's just, sometimes I feel like he doesn't see me," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's so consumed by work that I often feel invisible." Robert turned to me, his gaze intense. "You're anything but invisible, Sarah. You're remarkable, and you deserve to be appreciated." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "Thank you, Robert," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I really appreciate your support." He shrugged, a playful smile crossing his lips. "It's easy to appreciate someone as incredible as you." There was something in his tone that made my heart race. As we stood there, the silence stretched between us, charged with unspoken words. I could feel the pull of his charm, the magnetic energy that seemed to draw us closer together. It was intoxicating, yet terrifying. I knew I had to step back, to remind myself of the boundaries that should not be crossed. Our conversation shifted to lighter topics, but the tension lingered in the air like a brewing storm. I tried to shake off the feeling, to focus on the laughter and joy of the gathering, but my mind kept drifting back to Robert's gaze, the way he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. Later that night, I found myself confiding in my best friend, Lisa, during a quiet moment in the kitchen, while everyone else was distracted. "I don't know what to do, Lisa," I admitted, pouring myself a glass of wine. "Robert's been so kind to me, and I can't help but feel drawn to him." Her eyes widened, and she set down her glass. "Sarah, you have to be careful. He's your father-in-law. This could get messy." "I know," I sighed, feeling the weight of guilt settle heavily on my chest. "But it's not like I asked for these feelings. They just happened. Just be cautious. It's easy to get caught up in the thrill of it all. But think about David," she warned, her expression serious. I nodded, though the warning only deepened my curiosity. The thrill of the forbidden was intoxicating, and I found myself wanting to explore it further, even as the sense of guilt gnawed at me. As I left the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rain as I stepped outside, seeking refuge from the chaos of the family gathering. The weekend trip had started with laughter, but as the clouds rolled in and the rain began to pour, the atmosphere shifted. I found myself wandering away from the group, needing a moment to breathe, to collect my thoughts. That was when I spotted Robert leaning against the trunk of an old oak tree, a solitary figure against the stormy backdrop. "Sarah," he called softly when he saw me, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Come here." My heart raced as I approached him, the space between us charged with an electric tension. Rain trickled down my forehead, and for a moment, I was enveloped in the warmth of his presence. I felt drawn to him, as if an invisible string connected us, pulling me closer against all reason. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said, a playful glint in his eyes despite the downpour. I chuckled, but my laughter felt hollow. "Yeah, if you like a little drama with your sunshine," I replied, my voice laced with a nervous edge. He stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking. "You look troubled," he observed, his tone shifting from playful to sincere. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, overwhelmed by the weight of his gaze. "It's just, things have been different with David lately." The admission slipped out before I could stop myself. I had never intended to confide in Robert, yet here I was, sharing a piece of my heart amidst the storm. "Different how?" he pressed, his voice low and inviting. "Distant, I guess. It's like he's here, but not really present, you know? I looked down, tracing the outline of a raindrop as it slid down the bark of the tree. Sometimes I feel alone. Robert's expression softened, and he reached out, brushing his fingers against mine. The contact sent a jolt of warmth through my body, igniting a fire that I had tried so hard to extinguish. "You're not alone, Sarah," he said gently, his thumb gliding over my skin, igniting a spark of longing I couldn't ignore. My breath hitched as I felt the warmth of his hand against mine, the world around us fading into a muted backdrop. "Robert, we shouldn't," I began, but the words fell flat, drowned out by the yearning I felt inside. "Why not?" he challenged, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why shouldn't we embrace this connection? Life is too short for hesitation." I swallowed hard, torn between the loyalty I felt for David and the magnetic pull I experienced whenever I was near Robert. "What if we're crossing a line?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Sometimes lines are meant to be crossed," he replied, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that made my heart race. "You deserve to feel wanted, to feel alive." The storm raged on around us, but in that moment, it was just the two of us, suspended in time. My mind raced as I battled with my emotions, torn between the life I had built and the exhilarating, dangerous allure of Robert's presence. Suddenly, a clap of thunder echoed above us, jolting me back to reality. I pulled my hand away, the loss of his touch leaving an ache in my chest. "We need to get back," I said, my voice shaking with uncertainty. "Sarah," Robert said, stepping closer again, his eyes searching mine. "I can't pretend that I don't feel this pull between us. It's real, and we both know it." I felt exposed, vulnerable, in a way I had never experienced before. "But what about David?" I whispered, the weight of my marriage pressing down on me like the rain pouring from the sky. "Sometimes what we want isn't what we have," he replied, his tone earnest. "You deserve happiness, and I can see you're not finding it where you are." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the realization that he was right. I felt trapped in a life that had become a series of routines and unspoken frustrations, while here stood Robert, offering me a glimpse of something more. "Let's go back," I finally said, my voice trembling as I turned, needing to escape the weight of our conversation. But as I walked away, the storm raged on, and I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The allure of what could be haunted me, a whisper of temptation that refused to fade. I could feel Robert's gaze on me, a reminder of the choices that lay ahead, and the storm inside me was far from over. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air fresh and crisp. I stood in my living room, staring at my phone, my heart racing with anticipation and dread. Robert's message blinked on the screen. "Can we talk? I'd like to take a walk." I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. Did I really want to meet him? My mind was a battleground, torn between the loyalty I felt for David and the magnetic pull that Robert exerted over me. Taking a deep breath, I replied, "Sure. Where should we meet?" "Fifth Avenue Park, in 15 minutes. I felt a flutter in my stomach as I grabbed my coat. 15 minutes felt like an eternity, and every second seemed to amplify my anxieties. As I stepped outside, the world felt different, charged with an energy that mirrored my own turmoil. I walked briskly to the park, each step echoing the conflict inside me. When I arrived, Robert was already waiting. He stood under a tree, the soft glow of the remaining sunlight casting a halo around him. He looked up as I approached, his expression a blend of warmth and something deeper. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart raced at the sight of him. "Hey," he replied, stepping closer. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, feeling the weight of his gaze. "What did you want to talk about?" "I think we both know," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "The way things have been between us." I swallowed hard, my breath hitching in my throat. "Robert, this isn't right. You're my father-in-law." "Is that all we are to each other?" he asked, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. "I can't help how I feel about you, Sarah." "There's so much at stake," I said, my voice trembling. "What about David?" "David," he exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I care about him, but I can't ignore what's happening between us. It's more than just attraction. It's a connection." I felt a rush of emotions, confusion, anger, desire. "This isn't fair," I murmured. "I'm married." "I know," he said, stepping closer, his voice low and urgent. "But what if your marriage isn't what you think it is? What if you deserve something more?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to deny it, but I could feel the truth in my bones. David had been distant, lost in his own world, and Robert had filled that void in a way I never expected. "Robert, I started, but he cut me off, taking my hands in his. "I'm not asking you to leave, David, but I need you to understand how I feel." His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I was lost in them. "You're beautiful, smart, and you light up a room. I can't help but want to be near you." My heart raced, and I could feel the electricity in the air as he spoke. "I don't know what to say," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Just let yourself feel it," he urged, stepping even closer. "We can take it slow. Just don't deny what's happening." In that moment, my mind was a whirlpool of emotions. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the undeniable chemistry that had been building. But fear gripped me, and I took a step back, shaking my head. "I can't," I said, my voice trembling as I broke away from his grasp. "This is wrong." As I turned to leave, I felt the weight of his gaze on my back, a mixture of longing and disappointment. I walked away, my heart pounding in my chest, each step echoing my internal conflict. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. I could hear David in the other room, engrossed in his work, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing within me. I had to confront him, to lay bare the truth of our relationship. But the thought of it sent a chill down my spine. "David," I called out, my voice shaky. "Yeah?" he replied, walking into the living room with a smile that melted my heart, if only for a second. I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. "Can we talk?" "Sure. What's up?" My heart raced as I prepared to dive into the depths of our relationship, knowing that the conversation could change everything. But as I looked into his eyes, I felt a wave of uncertainty crash over me. Actually, I trailed off, the weight of what I wanted to say paralyzing me. "Sarah, is everything okay?" I nodded, but inside, I felt anything but okay. The truth was lurking just beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. I had to confront what was hidden, but the prospect of doing so felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, uncertain of what lay below. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, filling the space where honesty and vulnerability should have thrived. I had opened a door, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to step through. As the days passed since my last encounter with Robert, I felt a magnetic pull toward him that I couldn't shake off. Each time I saw him at family gatherings, my heart raced, a mix of exhilaration and guilt swelling inside me. My thoughts were consumed by the moments we shared, those fleeting gazes, the hushed tones of our conversations, the way his laughter seemed to echo long after he was gone. He had a way of making me feel alive, as if every interaction was an unspoken promise hanging in the air. I found myself wandering into the garden one afternoon, ostensibly to pick some flowers for the dining table. The sun bathed everything in a golden hue, and the scent of blooming roses filled the air. I didn't realize how lost in thought I had become until I heard Robert's voice behind me. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, a hint of mischief in his tone. I turned, startled, but there he was, leaning casually against the doorframe, a smile playing on his lips. "Of course," I managed to reply, my heart pounding as he stepped closer. "I've been meaning to ask you about that promotion of yours. You've been doing such an incredible job," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, making it hard to breathe. "Thank you," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, though I felt the heat creeping up my cheeks. "It's been a lot of hard work." "But you make it look easy," he said, taking a step closer. "How do you do it?" "I guess I just love what I do," I said, forcing a smile, trying to maintain the pretense of casual conversation while my heart thudded in my chest. His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. "You should celebrate more. You deserve it." "Maybe we could celebrate together sometime?" I suggested, half joking. But the instant I said it, I felt a surge of panic. What was I doing? Robert's expression changed, a flicker of something deeper passing between us. "I'd like that," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "But you know we have to be careful." "Careful about what?" I asked, my pulse racing. "About crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed," he replied, his tone serious, but his eyes sparkled with mischief. "But it's hard when the person you want is right in front of you." In that moment, the world around us faded away. I could feel the tension thickening, the proximity of our bodies making it difficult to think straight. I wanted to lean into him, to close the distance, and let my desires take over. But reason held me back. "Robert," I breathed, my voice trembling. "We can't. It's wrong." "Is it?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, a hint of challenge in his eyes. "Or is it just a social construct we've been taught to abide by?" I stepped back, shaking my head, wrestling with the storm of emotions swirling within me. "I'm married. I can't do this. I shouldn't even be entertaining these thoughts." He reached for my hand, brushing his fingers against mine, sending shivers up my spine. "You're not the only one who feels this way, Sarah. I can't ignore what's between us." I pulled my hand away, my heart racing with a mix of desire and fear. "Please, we can't." I have to think about David. David is not the only person in this equation, Robert pressed, his voice low, yet filled with an intensity that made my breath hitch. What about your happiness? I felt the weight of his words, the truth in them pressing down on me. But I couldn't give in. I need to figure things out, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I can't keep pretending this isn't happening. With that, I turned to leave, desperate to escape the allure of the moment. But Robert's voice stopped me. I'll be waiting, Sarah. I won't let this go easily. As I walked away, my mind was a whirlwind of confusion. How could I confront Robert about our feelings when I was still so tangled in my own? The guilt clawed at me, but the undeniable connection we shared was like a flame, drawing me closer, even as I tried to pull away. I needed to resolve this, to confront him, and put an end to the flirtation that had taken root in my heart. Yet, as my resolve grew, so did the fear of what that confrontation would mean for both of us. As I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands trembling slightly, I replayed the last few moments in my mind. Robert had just dropped a bombshell that rattled me to my core. I've known about David's infidelity for years, Sarah, he had said, his voice low and steady, as if he were delivering a solemn truth that he'd been carrying for too long. The room felt stifling, and I could hardly breathe. I had always viewed Robert as a pillar of strength within the family, a man of integrity and honor. Yet here he was, revealing a hidden truth that felt both shocking and strangely validating. My heart thundered in my chest as I tried to process his words. How could you know? I had stammered, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. Robert leaned closer, his eyes locked onto mine. I've seen the signs, Sarah. The late nights, the unexplained absences. I didn't want to believe it, but when I did, he paused, his expression softening. I wanted to protect you. You deserve better than this. His revelation opened a floodgate of emotions within me, each one crashing against the other. My loyalty to David wavered, and the allure of Robert's understanding became harder to resist. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Because I care about you, he replied, his tone earnest. And because I can't pretend that my feelings for you don't exist. They're real, Sarah, and I believe that you feel something too. I felt my cheeks flush, and I looked away, trying to regain my composure. This is all so complicated, I murmured, my mind racing with the implications of what he was saying. I can't just abandon my marriage. I have to think about everything, about David, about us. Robert reached out, his hand brushing against mine in a gesture that sent a jolt of electricity through me. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just know that I'm here for you. Always. The weight of his words lingered in the air, filling the space between us with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. I felt drawn to him, the magnetic pull of his presence overwhelming my better judgment. But then I remembered David's face, the way he smiled at me just a few hours ago, blissfully unaware of the chaos swirling around us. As I left Robert's house, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and feelings. I needed to confront David about his infidelity, needed to pull back the curtain on our marriage and expose the ugly truth. But how could I do that? The thought of breaking everything apart terrified me. Just as I was about to reach for my phone to call David, I noticed a notification pop up on the screen. An anonymous message. My heart raced as I opened it, the words sending chills down my spine. You don't know the half of it. There are more secrets lurking beneath the surface. Be careful who you trust. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. The implications were staggering. Who sent this? What did they know? My mind raced with questions, but the answers eluded me. I felt as though I were standing on the edge of a precipice, peering into an abyss of uncertainty and fear. With trembling hands, I shut my phone, the weight of the message settling heavily on my chest. I was caught in a web of lies and betrayals, each thread pulling tighter around me. I had to confront David, but now I had to tread carefully. What if the anonymous message was a warning? What if there were even darker secrets hidden just out of sight? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I had to uncover the truth, not just about David, but about everything. About Robert, about my feelings, and about what I truly wanted for my life. The stakes were higher than ever, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything.